Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Becoming Anchor podcast. So glad that you're joining us today. I'm one of your hosts, Lauren Jackson. This is our other wonderful host, Laura Deneen. We are two licensed professional therapists here in the Brentwood, Tennessee area. We are part of a group private practice, Anchor Counseling Company. We specialize in treating anything from eating disorders all the way to anxiety, grief, and loss, depression through the lifespan. We really love what we do sitting with our clients every day. And we've also found that we've just truly enjoyed connecting with you guys through this podcast, this new platform. And we're excited to bring some new content for you. We know it's the new year and we're just ready to kind of dive in. So quick disclaimer before we get started. This is not meant to be your therapy. This is for informational purposes only. If you find that as you're listening and engaging with us that you could benefit from therapy, if you're local to us, reach out. We'd love to connect, get you connected with a therapist here. If you're not local to us, find somebody local to you who is licensed.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. If you're new to the Becoming Anchored podcast, welcome. My name is Laura Deneen, and this has just been such a life-giving experience for both of us, and we couldn't be more grateful to have you listening in today. We're about two things on this show. So first and foremost, we are humans living life with you all, and that means that we are going to go through painful experiences, and we talk about some of those things on the show. And we also have the amazing gift of sitting with clients on a daily basis, and we absolutely adore that work. We really believe it's a gift, and it's hard even calling it a job. But, there are obviously some difficult days and hard parts of our careers, but we absolutely love what we get to do. And so we talk about some of the wisdom and some of the things that we have learned on this show. So, welcome to the show today. Today, we were talking in the hallway. We've shared before that we don't plan out the content a lot. So we were like, okay, what are we going to talk about? And in full transparency, we are recording in December. I told Lauren before we started recording that she looks like a Christmas snow bunny. We're watching on YouTube.
Yeah, if you're watching, I'm like fully decked out in my Christmas gear. So.
Yeah, she is. She's got her like bedazzled headband on and red sweatshirt and green puffer vest. So this episode will be released in the new year. And so we really wanted to talk about just permission to do this year differently and what that means for us as human beings and also as therapists. So we thought that content might be helpful for you all today. So Lauren, what comes to mind when you think about that topic, just permission to do this year differently?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of going into any new year, in particular this new year, because we're at the beginning of 2025, which is crazy. I think one of the biggest things that first pops to mind is like either New Year's resolutions or goals for the new year or hopes for the new year and how common that is, or even how culturally acceptable and even maybe there's some pressure around that. Mm-hmm. That there is, and I do it too, right? And I would say that, New Year's resolutions, if that's what you want to call it, aren't bad, right? They're not, there's nothing inherently wrong with them. I think that when we think about the ways that we feel like maybe we have to start a new year and that being a sense of like, I have to do this or I might be doing the new year wrong, can start to maybe, what's the word I'm looking for, prompt us to maybe just be curious around our intention behind that. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind is like, oh, I've got to, set New Year's resolutions or New Year goals, or I want to do all of these things in the new year or whatever, or in 2025. And again, like I said, there's nothing wrong with like, sitting down and just like thinking ahead and maybe dreaming or whatever. But I think it can be maybe helpful for us as we're doing that to be curious about why we're doing it. And we talk about that a lot on the podcast, just like creating space for curiosity. So yeah, I mean, that's the first thing that comes up for me. I don't know what comes up for you, Laura.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I fully agree with you. I think there's just so much marketing messaging, whether it's like in your face or more subtle, about this like kind of concept of like new year, new you. Or like you said, if you're not, creating XYZ resolutions, then you must be doing it wrong. And I think it's important for us to highlight the costs of this, right? Because what we see in our clients oftentimes shows up as perfectionism, or our clients that are in recovery from an eating disorder. They are constantly trying to work towards embodiment and having better body image. And then they are flooded with messages like, you need to lose weight, or you should be eating this way, or lots, whatever it might be. And so I think there are very real consequences of this messaging, like in our world around like new year, new you. I think it also can lead to burnout, right? Like when people, even if you're starting a goal, let's say that's like maybe not problematic, or not harmful to your mental health or physical health or whatever, sometimes the way that we approach our goals as a society can become problematic. And then people jump all in and they're working towards this goal, working, which is not inherently bad. But then the cost there, maybe you're not spending as much time with your family, or you're not taking care of yourself. And then you look up in March or April and like you're already burnt out from trying to achieve this goal. So again, like the goal itself is not problematic, but I think it's the way that we talk about New Year's resolutions and like all of the efforts that go into meeting them that may become problematic.
Totally. Well, and I think it's the expectation too that we put on them to reach them or to meet them or to become this new version of ourselves that we think that we have to be. And I love that language that you use. There's a cost to it. And that feels really important because I think any of our behaviors have a cost. And that doesn't mean it's a bad cost or a wrong cost, but I think it's worth paying. Like it's worth being mindful of that and being curious about what could the cost of this be? Historically, what has been the cost for me when I've set all of these New Year's resolutions and it's March, April, May, and I am burnt out, or I do have all of this negative self-talk, or I haven't reached these goals that I've set to have reached by May, and I feel like a failure because I think that's probably a story for a lot of us. And I say that because I've been there, is that I have all of these great goals or resolutions or ambitions in mind. And I get halfway through the year, even till I fall, and I'm like, what have I been doing? And it's like, well, I've probably been doing a lot, right? I've probably even just been surviving, which is enough. And this list of things looks like I haven't done anything. And I'm in this shame spiral, and there isn't any room for curiosity, which again is part of the cost of like, well, they're is my mental health suffering because of that. And so I think if we can't, if we maybe don't set kind of like that foundation at the beginning of that curiosity piece, what could the cost of this be? What is already my internal self-talk around this? Why am I doing this? What are my intentions? I think it can just get away from us really fast. And then maybe we find that we're not actually living the embodied present moment life that we want to be. We're not living in our values, right? Which we talk a lot about on the podcast too, which I find in my clients a lot. And it's a lot of the work we do is, hey, this thing that you're doing or these symptoms that you have are keeping you out of line with the life you want to be living. How do we get back in line with your values that can help redirect you back to that life that you want to live?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you brought up that emotional response of shame. So if you're new to the show and maybe you are familiar with the shame response, or maybe you're learning more about your emotional responses, shame is something that says either I am bad or wrong, or a part of me is bad or wrong. And so shame is a tough emotion to sit with. And yeah, when we set these unrealistic goals, it can lead to a shame response. if we are not meeting them. And I think it begs the question of really looking at, are my goals realistic to begin with? Are they in line with my values? What is my intention with this goal? And it's interesting because if we circle back around to like the marketing, as a whole, I think even like the new year, new you is problematic because the implication is that there is something wrong with like your present day self, like I feel like that is even like a more subtle shame messaging. So that just came to mind too as you were talking about shame, Lauren, is like, okay, even the messaging that we get around the new year itself, in my opinion, can be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're starting from the paradigm in the therapeutic space of like, okay, we do have innate self-worth, and sure, do we want to work towards being the healthiest version of ourselves? Like, absolutely. And I'm all for that. But this messaging that we receive around like, no, you need to change fundamentally who you are, I think is problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this like it's this balance, if you will, of holding both. Like I am good right now. Like I am totally worthy and acceptable in this moment. Everything about me. And what do I not yet know about myself? And can I keep like learning and moving more towards knowing myself better? Because ultimately, and I tell my clients this all the time, therapy for me and kind of my clinical, like, I don't know, stance, if you will, as therapy is about like coming back to ourselves, about coming back home to ourselves. And so when I'm now presently, when I'm thinking about going into a new year, because yes, let's all like name that a new year is exciting. There are some, for a lot of us, and maybe for some, it's not, right? I don't want to discount or invalidate that. For me personally, I think New Year's are exciting, and there is something hopeful about a new year, and there is something refreshing about like thinking of the things that I can do, and almost like not starting over, but there's this like sense of it. I don't know, but for me, when I'm thinking about what do I maybe want this new year to look like, I'm trying to think about, are the things that I maybe want to move towards in this new year going to help me keep coming back to myself better?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And if we ended the show today with that question, I think that would be enough. But yeah, are these items on my to-do list, on my goal list, are they in line with my values? Do they help me become more embodied, like you're talking about? Yeah, I mean, I'm all for asking that question consistently, right? Like, it's not like we just ask that question one time and we're done.
Right.
You and I have both done a lot of therapy in our lives. And I think that is something that therapy has gifted us with, is the ability to consistently ask that question, not just in the new year. Mm-hmm. Like, does this thing that I want to do and does this dream I have, does that help me come back home to myself? And as someone who is a dreamer, and I've mentioned this on the podcast, just a quick, piece that came to mind here too is really just an encouragement to our listeners today to pause and get curious about the types of goals that you're setting. Are they realistic for you? Are you comparing your goals to someone else's goals? I think that our clients really struggle with that. And this has been part of my story as well. Like holding my dreams up against someone else's, and how am I like measuring up? And that can invite in a shame response too. And so we really have to be cautious, I think, around that of like, okay, is this goal like doable for me in this season of life? Like, do I have the capacity for this? I am someone that like, I kind of like the hustle a little bit, like it gives me life. But then I've gotten to the point too where I have gotten burnt out, or the way that I'm showing up isn't like allowing me to be embodied like you're talking about. So I think those are helpful questions for you guys to ask yourself as well. Like, is this realistic? What's the cost going to be? What's the time commitment? If historically I have overcommitted, can I like scale it back and do one of my goals instead of 10 of them?
Mm-hmm.
And just setting, I think, like more realistic expectations, I think can be really helpful in the new year too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then something else that just came to mind as you were talking, Laura. So let's say we have a few goals, a few resolutions, a few hopes, dreams, whatever you want to call them. And there's not a right or wrong word to use, right? Let's say we have a few and we get to May, we get to June, we get to like, halfway through the year and we're kind of revisiting those and we feel like we're failing or we feel like we're not making enough progress or we feel like we've not like done it good enough. That's when, like we've been talking about, that kind of shame spiral, shame talk can set in. And that's a really great place to practice pausing that shame cycle for a second and getting curious about, I wonder why, right? Like, is there information I can gather around what has kept me or gotten in the way or whatever from making the progress I expected to make on this goal? Was that realistic progress? Was that actually a goal that was in line with my values? Was that a goal that I set because other people were setting it or because it felt like it was going to help me grow as a person or help me come back home as a person, right? Have I actually made some progress? Have I actually done something that has moved me towards it, but I'm just not acknowledging that, right? So I think that even as we're being mindful or acknowledging like, oh, I'm halfway through the year and I kind of like that one kind of got left in the dust. It's like, can we practice what we're talking about right now then as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love all of this, right? Reevaluating.
Yeah.
Right? Like an intentional pause can give us such rich information. And yeah, it's interesting. I think this has been true historically for me at various times. Like if I don't meet the goal, I internalize it and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I'm doing something wrong, right? Versus like looking externally and saying like, okay, was this goal realistic, Laura? Were you in a season of life where you had the capacity to do that? And there's, I think, a lot of growth for me, even in recent years, around externalizing some of it versus like weaponizing it towards myself of like, okay, well, I'm just not measuring up to the goal. That being like the end of the story.
Yeah.
So the permission to pause, the permission to get curious about what is and isn't working, the permission to evaluate like, yeah, did I set this goal because I'm trying to like, get approval from someone else or because my friend group was doing this goal or what have you. And so I think reevaluating is certainly a wonderful, maybe even like reminder that we can set in May, June, July, midway through the year.
Yeah. A couple years ago, maybe it was like 5 years ago. Maybe this was back when my husband and I first got married. I think it was because we were living in our old house. I had like, we do this thing where like at the beginning of the year, him and I will sit down and we'll kind of think about the new year and we'll think about like what are some maybe things as a family that feel valuable to us that we want to keep in mind that we, whatever. And now that we have a child, we're thinking about like parenting and he'll be 3 in less than a week, which is crazy. But I remember personally for myself, I was like, I want to meditate more. Like and so I was like, every day I'm going to set a timer and I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes or 5, whatever it was. Like I set a goal, but then I was like, what's the goal acronym where it's like measurable, whatever. Anyways, so I like.
Are you talking about like the SMART acronym?
I think so. So I was like trying to do that to like make it a thing, whatever. And so I did it for a little bit, and then it started like not happening, and da 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 da. And I remember at one point I was like, man, what happened? Like, why am I not doing this anymore? And it's like, I think I probably was. But I had this like expectation on myself that I had to do it a certain way every single day. And I realized, oh, that's probably what's getting in my way, is that it has to be perfect. And so that's just an example, a little example of what it can look like to have a really healthy goal, like meditation, mindfulness, like carving out intentional time during the day to practice that is great, right? And I was in a season in life too where I didn't have a child yet. I was, it was just my husband and I had a lot more time and whatever. So that would look a lot different. But So yeah, that's a goal that I had, but there was like this layer of perfectionism over it that I had to I had to peel back. So.
Even like rigidity, like lovingly, right? I don't say that as a criticism, but I know you well and care so much for you. And so, yeah, there's like that rigidity piece that I personally have experienced as well, or kind of those rules of like, okay, I have to do it at this time and it has to be this amount of time. And I have certainly fallen prey to that as well. And so I have a lot of compassion for you. And that was something that came up too. Like, yeah, if we don't meet our goals, what is our response to ourselves? Right? Are we extending the same compassion to ourselves that we would extend to a loved one or a friend?
Yeah.
This is also an opportunity to, practice self-compassion, like holding both, right? Like holding the goal and holding, the idea that we may not meet the goal.
Mm-hmm.
I read a post yesterday on socials and, I think she was an account and I'll have to find it. Maybe we can tag it in the show notes, but
really
she talks about, untangling worth from what we do. Yeah. And I think that this is really the meat of this conversation in the sense that, a lot of us grew up in homes or, our culture, even Western culture around like our worth being so intricately tied to what we do or, the goals that we set or what we achieve.
Yeah.
And I've had to personally do a lot of work around this as well in therapy of like, okay, I am lovable. I'm enough. I'm worthy no matter what I achieve, no matter what, whatever it is that you attach to your worth. And so I think that this is an opportunity as well to look at our worth beyond our goals or apart from our goals.
Yeah.
And that's like really the deeper question of like, do I believe that I'm worthy no matter what I achieve, no matter what goals I set?
Yeah, because yes, you can have some goals, some resolutions, some hopes, dreams, plans, all of that. And I don't know who needs to hear this. I think I need to hear this. You have full permission for January 1st, 2025 to be another day. Just to be another day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the next day and the next day and the next day to just be another day. Like that's okay. That's more than okay, right? Like if you're really like just surviving right now or existing or just trying to figure it out, and or if you are thriving and you are living your best life, again, you still don't have to have goals. So it's like I think really the premise too of this podcast is, okay, how are we going to do 2025 differently? And if for you that means maybe intentionally not setting goals, maybe intentionally not having resolutions, maybe intentionally like just challenging yourself to allow the first to be another day, maybe that's what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this so much. So much.
Yeah.
Permission to not set goals. If that's what you need, do it. Take it.
Yeah.
And I think for some of us, that is a challenge, right? If we are consistent, I just want to name that to you, right? Like if you're consistently like, what's next? What's next? Maybe your nervous system needs a pause and maybe you've been living in fight or flight. We were just talking about this as a team. We did a training on polyvagal theory recently, and we're just talking about like we can really get stuck in this like fight or flight space, and we can get stuck in that survival mode. And there's a lot of research that says like calm and rest and play are what support our nervous systems and like recalibrating. So that's a whole nother episode that we can chat about maybe down the road. But I think it goes in line with what you're saying, Lauren, of like, okay, permission to like not set the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This has been such a great conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Oftentimes we talk about the things that we need to hear ourselves. So that's just a little like side note and caveat for you. So yeah, I mean, Lauren, anything coming to mind for our listeners as far as like an affirmation or homework? Would you like to do one of those or both?
I can do a little bit of homework. I feel like we've given like even lots of little bits of homework throughout the whole episode, but I would just say that if you sit down or if you are thinking about the new year and setting resolutions or not setting resolutions or goals or whatever, being curious about your why and asking the question, is this thing, whatever it is, going to help me come back to myself?
Love it.
Yeah.
And your affirmation to take with you is I am worthy no matter what goals I set or no matter what goals I achieve.
It's good.
Thank you all for being with us today on the Becoming Anchored podcast. We will see you next time. Take care, guys.